Hey folks, Mr. Global here. This is going to be one of my longer videos because we're going to do a deep dive into oil politics during the Biden administration, particularly. We're going to talk about Trump, OPEC, allegations of collusion. But I'm just fascinated by this. If anything, for history, I don't think we'll be proving anything here today, but we can definitely have some conversations about the things that occurred during the Biden administration, right? Because the relationship between former President Donald Trump, or current President Donald Trump now, OPEC, and the oil industry has, long been a subject of scrutiny, particularly during the Biden administration. Critics have accused Trump of coordinating with OPEC Plus to manipulate oil prices. First to bail out struggling U.S. oil companies during his presidency, and later to undermine Biden's energy policies. This is going to be somewhat of an examination of the evidence, motivations, and implications of these alleged actions, right? So we start with Trump's 2020 deal, which occurred during COVID. If you're not super familiar with the 2020 deal, once COVID started, oil prices tanked. They went negative for the first time in history. And Donald Trump got with Russia and Saudi Arabia to try to end a supposed price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia. But the fact of the matter is, Saudi Arabia was the only country between the two that drastically increased production. Russia didn't increase production during the supposed price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia. It was all Saudi Arabia. You can go back and look at production history. We've been told, ever since this started, all throughout media and government and everywhere else, that this was a price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Russia never adjusted their oil production at all. And that's what a price war is. Donald Trump personally intervened in this. He negotiated with Vladimir Putin and Mohammed bin Salman and OPEC to cut production and artificially inflate prices. And the deal they landed on was a 10% production cut for 2 years. This immediately removed 9.7 million barrels a day of oil off the global markets. And keep in mind, this was a 2-year deal. This is unheard of. OPEC doesn't do 2-year deals. To keep that much oil off the market for a period of 2 years with no idea of the ending in sight for the pandemic is kind of crazy. Normally they would do this for 3 to 6 months, come back and review, say, hey, what adjustments do we need to make, and that gives you the capability and the nimbleness to make adjustments sort of on the fly, so you don't have long-term shocks to the market. And this deal came after Harold Hamm, the president and founder of Continental Energy, had lost $3 billion in a matter of weeks. And he pressured Donald Trump to act as a donor to Donald Trump. And he did. And Trump later bragged about the deal at rallies, admitting, hey, we had to get the price of oil up. We saved those companies. And analysts argued that, Trump's move contradicted free market principles, which is my issue with all of this. I'm a big free market guy. No U.S. president had ever openly pushed for higher oil prices. That's not a thing. And higher prices hurt American consumers and benefited Russia and Saudi Arabia, two of our largest geopolitical rivals. When all this was over, Saudi Aramco was the richest company to ever exist on the planet, ever. So they certainly benefited, But yeah, Trump's efforts to undermine Biden's energy policies, and these are alleged, of course. But after leaving office, Trump maintained close ties with OPEC Plus leaders. And people allege that during the Biden administration, Trump's rhetoric and policies may have encouraged OPEC Plus to restrict supply and keeping prices high to weaken Biden's standing. And understand something. Once the OPEC 2020 deal expired, oil prices and gas prices started falling. And that happened in April of 2022. And just a few short months later, OPEC started enacting major production cuts once again, offsetting all of the oil production gains that were occurring under the Biden administration, and the Republican Party continued to parrot the narrative. Biden had destroyed the U.S. oil and gas industry. That's why prices were high. Prices were high because OPEC was producing about 4 million barrels a day less under the Biden administration at this point than they had been under the Trump administration. They were keeping oil prices artificially high to hurt Joe Biden. And then you had, the Biden SPR release, which backfired. Keep in mind, all of this oil that was released under the Biden administration had been mandated for sale. I think there was roughly 56, 58 million barrels more than had been mandated for sale. This is all oil that, the Congress, parties from, both sides of the aisle had agreed to be sold. It had been agreed to under the 2015 budget, the FAST Act, the 2018 budget, the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. All of these pieces of legislation, ultimately called for mandated sale of oil out of the SPR to help pay for those pieces of legislation. So when Biden moved some of these sale dates up and kind of coordinated this oil to be sold over a 6-month period, 180 million barrels over a 6-month period, it sort of backfired. The largest ever drawdown of the SPR, and what does OPEC do? They cut production further. We did see savings from this, but OPEC did absolutely cut production further to try to negate that. And analysts believe that the Saudi-led OPEC cuts were partly aimed at hurting the Biden administration, and positioning Trump as a more favorable leader for oil producers. Absolutely. And then, Trump's drill baby drill policy. Even as a private citizen, Trump was pushing for maximizing U.S. oil output. And OPEC feared that could undercut their market control and their market share if he returned to power. And then you had the 2024 election and oil industry collusion concerns. You guys remember all of that? Trump was campaigning for re-election, and reports started surfacing that the oil industry, many of the backers had engaged with anti-competitive coordination with OPEC. The Federal Trade Commission investigated the Scott Sheffield, the CEO of Pioneer Natural Resources, who was going through a buyout. Exxon was buying out his company. And it cost him a seat on the board of Exxon because they determined that he colluded with OPEC to limit production and inflate prices. Scott Sheffield is one of Donald Trump's proxies. And Donald Trump's received heavy funding from the oil and gas industry. Some who allegedly lobbied OPEC to maintain high prices, boost profits, and hurt Joe Biden all in the process. So with OPEC, with their dilemma, because Trump's pushing for U.S. production surges, OPEC Plus is facing pressure to cut supply and hurt Biden, or risk losing market share if Donald Trump won. And then, you had a lot of economic and political fallout from all of this. The alleged collusion had significant consequences. We were using gas prices were a political weapon. High gas prices under Biden were weaponized by Trump, despite his own role in encouraging that behavior from OPEC Plus. U.S. energy independence was put at risk with the depletion of the SPR. Global oil market instability. OPEC Plus's production gains influenced by U.S. politics created volatile price swings, hurting both consumers and producers. And this is a thing that happened. We just all lived this, right? So the evidence suggests that a complex interplay between Trump and U.S. oil magnates and OPEC Plus, kind of blurred the lines between policy and profit, political strategy. Whether it was through direct negotiating, I don't know. Whether he used proxies like the oil magnates, I don't know. But Trump's, relationship with OPEC appears to have been a double-edged sword. It propped up oil companies while undermining Biden's economic record, and it hurt Americans, And as the 2024 election loomed, the oil market remained a battleground with OPEC Plus caught between Biden's attempts to stabilize prices and Trump's promises of a drilling boom. The full extent of this coordination may never be known, but the pattern raises serious questions about energy policy, corporate influence, and geopolitical leverage in U.S. politics. And now we have the Trump, back in power. Donald Trump is back in power for a second administration, promising of drill baby drill and energy dominance, and he seems to be ceding all of this power right back to OPEC, asking them to increase production, creating a lot of economic uncertainty, which is driving down oil prices. Oil companies in the United States are slashing their capex, reducing their budgets, laying down rigs, laying off workers. We're ceding some of our energy independence back to OPEC, and specifically Saudi Arabia. Is this our payment? Is this how we square up? Is this how Donald Trump squares up with the Middle East for what they did for him under the Biden administration, helped him get back in office? I don't know. But it's a fascinating topic with a lot of twists and turns, just a lot of uncertainty. The relationship between Donald Trump and OPEC is very tight. They're very close. He just got back from Saudi Arabia. And now it looks like we may be on the verge of a nuclear deal with Iran, which will further drive down oil prices. And this will, it's a good thing. But this will result in job losses in the United States. Absolutely. Absolutely will. So, let me know what you think. Do you think there's anything to this? Leave a comment. Ask me a question. Like and share the video. I don't do a lot of long form content. I hope to do more of it. I hope to make this more what my regular content looks like. I really appreciate you guys hanging with me. So please support my page. Like, share, and comment. Let's get this page built up. I have some big things going on in the future, so I really appreciate you guys have been hanging with me these past few months if I built this channel. And I'm going to do more of this type content in the future in coming days. So I really appreciate you guys. Let me know what you think about this. And you guys have a great evening. Thanks.